Hi there, I'm John Green. You're watching Crash Course World History, and today we're going to talk about
Iraq.
No, you purportedly smart globe. We're going to talk about Mesopotamia. So about 5,000 years ago, in the land Meso, or between, the Tigris and Euphrates Potomoi, or rivers, cities started popping up, much like they had in our old friend the Indus River Valley. These early Mesopotamian cities engaged in a form of socialism where farmers contributed their crops to public storehouses, out of which workers, like metal workers or builders or male models or whatever, would be paid uniform wages in grain. One of the legacies of Mesopotamia is the enduring conflict between country and city. What were these city-states like? Well, let's take a look at one such city-state, Gilgamesh's hometown of Uruk, in the thought bubble. Uruk was a walled city with an extensive canal system and several monumental temples called ziggurats. The priests of these temples initially had all the power because they were able to communicate directly with the gods, and that was a useful talent because Mesopotamian gods were moody and frankly pretty mean. Like, according to Gilgamesh, they once got mad at us because we were making too much noise while they were trying to sleep, so they decided to destroy all of humanity with a flood. The Tigris and Euphrates are decent as rivers go, but Mesopotamia is no Indus Valley with its on-schedule flooding and easy irrigation. A lot of slave labor was needed to make the Tigris and Euphrates useful for irrigation. They're also difficult to navigate and flood unpredictably and violently. But about 1,000 years after the first temples, we find in cities like Uruk a rival structure begins to show up. The palace. The responsibility for the well-being and success of the social order was shifting from gods to people, a power shift that will seesaw throughout human history until probably forever, actually. But in another development we'll see again, these kings, who probably started out as military leaders or really rich landowners, took on a quasi-religious role. How? Often by engaging in sacred marriage, specifically scootily pooping with the high priestess of the city's temple. So the priests were overtaken by kings, who soon declared themselves priests. Mesopotamia gave us writing, specifically a form of writing called cuneiform, which was initially created not to woo lovers or whatever, but to record transactions like how many bushels of wheat were exchanged for how many goats. I'm not kidding, by the way, a lot of cuneiform is about wheat and goats. I don't think you can overestimate the importance of writing, but let's just make 3 points here. First, writing and reading are things that not everyone can do, so they create a class distinction, one that in fact survives to this day. 2, once writing enters the picture, you have actual history instead of just a lot of guesswork and archaeology. And 3, without writing, I would not have a job. So I'd like to personally thank Mesopotamia for making it possible for me to work while reclining in my lazy boy. So why did this writing happen in Mesopotamia? Well, the Fertile Crescent, while it is fertile, is lacking pretty much everything else. In order to get metal for tools, or stone for sculpture, or wood for burning, Mesopotamia had to trade. This trading eventually led Mesopotamia to develop the world's first territorial kingdom. These new Mesopotamian city-states were similar to their predecessors in that they had temples and writing and their own self-glorifying stories, but they were different in some important ways. First, that early proto-socialism was replaced by something that looked a lot like private enterprise, where people could produce as much as they would like as long as they gave a cut, also known as taxes, to the government. We talk a lot of smack about taxes, but it turns out they're pretty important to creating stable social orders. Things were also different politically because the dudes who'd been the tribal chiefs became like full-blown kings who tried to extend their power outside of cities and also tried to pass on their power to their sons. The most famous of these early monarchs is Hammurabi, or as I remember him from my high school history class, the Hammer of Abi. Hammurabi ruled the new kingdom of Babylon from 1792 BCE to 1750 BCE. Hammurabi's main claim to fame is his famous law code, which established everything from the wages of ox drivers to the fact that the punishment for taking an eye should be having an eye taken. Even though territorial kingdoms like Babylon were more powerful than any cities that had come before, and even though Babylon was probably the world's most populous city during Hammurabi's rule, it wasn't actually that powerful, and keeping with the pattern, it was soon taken over by the formerly nomadic Kassites. The thing about territorial kingdoms is they relied on the poorest people to pay taxes and provide labor and serve in the army, all of which made you not like your king very much. So if you saw any nomadic invaders coming by, you might just be like, "Hey, nomadic invaders, come on in, you seem better than the last guy." Well, that was the case until the Assyrians came along anyway. The Assyrians have a deserved reputation for being the brutal bullies of Mesopotamia. But the Assyrians did give us an early example of probably the most important and durable form of political organization in world history, and also Star Wars history: the empire. So the biggest problem with empires is that by definition they're diverse and multi-ethnic, which makes them hard to unify. So beginning around 911 BCE, the Neo-Assyrian Empire grew from its hometowns of Ashur and Nineveh to include the whole of Mesopotamia, the eastern coast of the Mediterranean, and even, by 680 BCE, Egypt. They did this thanks to the most brutal, terrifying, and efficient army the world had ever seen. So what happened to the Assyrians? Well, first, they extended their empire beyond their roads, making administration impossible. But more importantly, when your whole worldview is based on the idea that the apocalypse will come if you ever lose a battle, and then you lose one battle, the whole worldview just blows up. That eventually happened, and in 612 BCE, the city of Nineveh was finally conquered, and the Neo-Assyrian Empire had come to its end.